Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
Summer has gone and fall is here, kinda, which means that the Mockingcast is back. You two, I have missed the two of you very much so. And I've intentionally tried not to catch up with you too much because I wanted to hear about it on the air. So before we
Is that your excuse for not checking in? Yeah, I was going to say. I just thought,
Okay.
we're not really friends.
Yeah,
Just
we're not really
kinda
friends.
co-host.
So,
Yeah.
All right,
Just
Dave.
purely professional. Keep it above board. Well, hey, all right, tell me what's going on. Give me the lowdown. How's Nashville? How's Palm Beach? How was the summer?
We had a great summer. Josh has not had a vacation really since he did sabbatical 2 summers ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that was so nice. And yeah, we did DC, which was really sweet. We did the Outer Banks, and I have to say, all the white people were right. It's really nice.
It is nice.
Yeah, it was a good summer. Family reunion, it was all the things. So yeah. Oh, I went to Dollywood with a really good friend who is on her 4th round of cancer and has girls around Annie's age. And I was like, like Melina Smith says, we're at that age where our friends start to get weird cancer. So we should just do stuff together. So anyway, it was really, really sweet.
Wow.
That's wise. That is wisdom.
I was going to say, I feel like you were pretty much off social media all summer.
I was.
Except for, I think I did see a picture from Dollywood.
Yeah.
I don't think a person is allowed to go there without...
Which
And
meant
not
that
let people know.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yeah.
meant that our tech stream was Sarah's outlet for social media. It's like anything I would have put on Facebook or Instagram is now
100%.
going on the tech stream.
100%. Yes. That's how I coped. Yeah.
Yes.
I was like, hey,
Yeah.
guys, I know you don't care, but
Because
here's
you
where
can't
we
just go
are.
cold turkey. I mean,
No.
yeah,
No, that
you
would
gotta
be
you gotta
crazy.
make someone feel jealous about how great your life is.
100%. Okay, France. All right, keep going.
Mr.
Okay,
yeah.
France.
Let's hear it.
Dollywood.
Yeah, I gotta say
I
the
went to
most...
my France this summer. RJ went to France.
RJ went to actual France with the most incredible photos. Tell us what happened. I mean, this is...
It was amazing. It was my wife and I. Yeah, we did a couple weeks in France for our 25th wedding anniversary, which was really the first vacation or any significant length of time we had just the two of us since before our first son was born. So about 22 years. And it was just really great. It was wonderful. I did not want to leave. It's my favorite place. It's beautiful. We were at the ocean. We were in the mountains. It's just very relaxed and nice. And she did not go anywhere near Paris. I was like, oh, do you go to the Olympics? I was like, nope, completely avoided that.
Mm-hmm.
Saw some friends while we were there. It was a really wonderful trip. Yeah.
What about the rest of the summer, Arch?
The rest of the summer was okay. Like we did that in July. July was great. June, I went to go do the funeral in Houston for my son's friend who passed away unexpectedly. And then did another funeral in California in August for a member of Jamie's family, her stepfather. And then she just spent a good portion of the summer kind of taking care of her parents. So a lot of trips to California for her. So I would say July was amazing. June and August was kind of exhausting, especially because our son Marshall went back to school like 3 weeks later than he was supposed to because they were doing construction. So that was really fun.
Oh my God.
But just having, but he's back at school today. Praise God.
Praise God.
So yeah, it was a very full and good summer and some amazing things. And then also just some hard things, but hey, that's life.
Well, I will say those French pictures were, what do we call it? Drool inducing. I mean, they're just unbelievably great. And, I remember early marriage RJ Heyman. I'm one of the few that can place that. And you guys have definitely had some things to celebrate, I think, like some water under the bridge. Like if I can get to 25, having gone through half of what you guys have gone through, I think that'd be a pretty massive...
It's been a wild ride. It is, like I said to my wife, I was like, it has not been boring. You cannot say that it's been boring. So yeah, it's been good.
Well, we had fantastic summer, I gotta say. It was great.
Good.
I finished the book early on in the summer, which was really
Good
big.
for you.
Just revealed the cover today.
Load off.
The Big Relief.
Yeah.
Feels like a huge relief to be done with The Big Relief, at least at this stage. We were at the beach for a bit. I worked on I did a little bit of work on like the Brothers Zoll stuff, which was a lot of fun. But I took Tommy, our youngest, to Disney for his birthday. He'd never been.
That.
So
Amazing.
good.
Pretty magical. Then we had our week in Michigan at Camp Arcadia, which was, just kind of blissful. And now we're back in Seaville. And I feel very much like the massive overwhelm of being a taxi cab driver for my children again.
For Amazon packages that hate you. That's my favorite description. I think of that all the time. We're basically just Amazon drivers, but our packages hate us.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
That's good.
Lots of fun things to sort of enjoy that this summer that I've wanted to mention. But before I do you guys have any recommendations, any lessons learned from the summer that you feel like offloading before we get into the new territory of the fall?
I learned that my husband really can do anything because at, 46 years old of age, he did a 2-hour surfing lesson with our son.
Wow.
And he was the oldest person, including the instructors who are all 18-year-old guys from California who literally just travel and teach surfing around, everywhere year round. And it was really amazing. I was like, oh, I remember we were around a friend several years ago who was a bit older than us, in his 40s, and he was talking about oh man, I can't get out there and play basketball anymore with my kids. And I found it really moving. I was like, we can still do all these things. And anyway, it was awesome. And Neil had so much fun, and so
that's
it was
incredible.
really beautiful. Yeah.
What about you, RJ? Any fun recommendations from the summer? Any lessons learned? Any cautionary tales to report?
No, not really. I don't know. Did I learn anything this summer? I mean, I guess I learned no recommendations really, except for France. Obviously, France is amazing.
France is a good recommendation.
Especially if you can get over there on miles like we did. Once you get there, it feels like everything is half as expensive as it is in the States.
And this is new information for people, RJ, because people never think about going to France.
They don't.
So it's really
they don't. It's off the radar. It's really off the beaten path. So you're welcome for the hot tip.
I went to Epcot once, and saw France.
You did. You saw France at Epcot.
Same girl.
I think what I learned this summer, and it's not a lesson I'll actually heed, but getting up early actually is good for me. I always feel better when I get I had a couple moments where, usually because of jet lag or because of unforeseen circumstances, I ended up getting up early, once with my wife, once with my son, watching the sunrise. It was really amazing. And then when I get up early and I just get outside and do something, I just feel better, and the whole day goes better. So I got to work on that a little bit this year. Just I don't know.
How have you not ever gone from body surfing to actual surfing? That's what I want to know.
I surfed a little bit. We did a little bit of surfing in, I took a lesson in Costa Rica a few years ago when we were there, and it was fun. I don't know. Yeah.
Gosh, well, the stuff I have to recommend is all media, but so be it. After we went to Sundance last year, I talked about the documentary Daughters, which has finally hit Netflix in August. And good God, everyone I've told to shove that one down their throat has thanked me for it, though, with tears in their eyes. Such a beautiful sort of grace and practice kind of cry fest of a documentary. RJ, I'm not sure you could actually handle it, to be honest with you. I'm not sure.
I probably couldn't, which means I definitely need to watch it.
I think Sarah
I could use a good cry.
Would abreact massively and enjoy it and love it. But RJ, I don't know if you could even operate afterwards. But
okay, I'll prepare.
I don't know,
myself
Dave.
for
I'm
that.
on enough Lexapro that usually my reaction is, I think I would cry if I weren't on Lexapro.
Could it puncture the Lexapro cloud of?
That's exactly, yes.
It might. If anything, could. The most powerful religious thing I watched was, I'm a big fan of this show Alone, the survivalist Olympics basically that goes on.
Naked and Afraid.
Because people go out there into the Arctic, they're just dropped there with a camera, and they have total either spiritual conversions or breakthroughs, or they just can't handle the loneliness. All of these feelings come up. The most recent season of Alone, not only it just spanned the entire gamut of the human experience, but especially there's one character, and I won't spoil what happens, but there's one guy named Timber in it who's as close to a Old Testament prophet, sort of citing scripture from memory like RJ, but on steroids, while creating something out of nothing. It's really, really powerful. It fed me spiritually. And, for me, the fact that the Gallagher brothers buried the hatchet and the Oasis are getting back together is not a small thing. That's been
Although Ticketmaster crashed, right? Like it was a whole fiasco, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not actually planning to go, but there is hope in the world.
I just like the idea.
Well, yeah. I'm obsessed. I'm massively obsessed. They're very formative figures in my life. They're, numbskulls of the highest order, but I do enjoy them, and I can trace periods of my life along that axis, which is kind of fun. Also, looking forward this fall. I should mention it before we begin talking about other stuff, but Sarah and I are getting together to talk in Tyler. We're doing a Tyler conference. We had to postpone our Charlottesville one because of a variety of circumstances, including a national election. But we are going to be at the end of September. We're going to be in Tyler. Can't wait to be there with all those folks. But if you're anywhere close by, come hang out with us. We'd love to see you. I'll put that link in the show notes. Well, I thought our first time back in a little while, we're going to tackle some core themes that we are drawn to over the years before we expand into all sorts of strangeness this fall, which I'm sure is coming. But a couple of major articles that appeared in the past couple months that were worth highlighting. And the New York Times Magazine ran a long article last month called "Why is the Loneliness Epidemic So Hard to Cure?" This is by Matthew Scher. He writes this: loneliness is a compound or multidimensional emotion. It contains elements of sadness and anxiety, fear, and heartache. The experience of it is inherently intensely subjective. A clerk at a crowded grocery store can be wildly lonely, just as a wizened hermit living in a cave can weather solitude in perfect bliss. This article, Scher writes that the pandemic clearly exposed and turbocharged an existing problem of increasing loneliness in our culture, but it did not create it. And that problem has continued to accelerate long after the world reopened. The American Psychiatric Association says that 25% of U.S. residents are lonelier today than they were before the pandemic. Then the article goes through a bunch of initiatives that have been started, loneliness ministers in Japan and Britain and lots of, things that are going on to try to help people connect. And he says, what all these various efforts share, to one degree or another, is the idea that the solution to loneliness is only a phone call or an email or a text or a friendly door knock away. That the key to closing the gap between perceived and realized levels of interpersonal relations is ultimately a matter of restoring a world that has slipped away from us. But at best, this sort of thinking reflects a misunderstanding of how we live now. When we talk about loneliness, what we're actually talking about are all the issues that swirl perilously underneath it. Alienation and isolation, distrust and disconnection, and above all else, a sense that many of the institutions and traditions that once held us together are less available to us or no longer of interest. And to address those problems, you can't just turn back the clock. He then goes on to talk about Robert Putnam and the book Bowling Alone that talked about the erosion of membership in organizations and groups that held Americans together previously, not just Rotary clubs and sports teams, but churches, big time. It says nearly a quarter of a century on, the trend lines identified by Putnam have not been reversed. If anything, they've grown more pronounced. In 2024, the number of one-person households in the U.S. was more than triple what it was in 1950. Needless to say, marriage doesn't negate loneliness. Plenty of bad or abusive marriages are chillingly sad for the people locked inside them. And a single-person home is not synonymous with a lonely one. Still, it's impossible to look up at the aggregate data, including a new survey by Gallup on weekly attendance of religious services, which sank last year to 21% of the U.S. population, and not feel something has been lost. Now, this is one of the key researchers at Harvard. He said this in a talk in March. He said, I'm not suggesting that we should become more religious. No. But I want to just suggest to you, that religious communities are a place where adults engage kids, stand for moral values, engage kids in big moral questions, where there's a fusion of a moral life and a spiritual life. A sense that you have obligations to your ancestors and to your descendants, where there is a structure for dealing with grief and loss. I feel urgently like we have to figure out how to reproduce those aspects of religion in secular life.
Good luck.
But then he quotes Eric Kleinenberg, who spoke at a Mockingbird conference, a sociologist in NYU, who says that one big problem I have with the current rhetoric around loneliness is that we treat it as if it's permanently going in only one direction, but it's not. It's more interesting than that. When loneliness gripped the Western world during the Industrial Revolution, everyone didn't suddenly retreat to their ancestral villages. The radio didn't make us permanently lonely. We built new communities in the city, far from our families. We used radio to expand our world and to talk to people on the other side of the country. As hard as it may be to accept, we can adapt and will adapt. The path out of loneliness in 2024 lies almost certainly via a similar route, forward. And if you squint, you can see it, a scenario in which the loneliness crisis today is really a mass period of acclimatization. That last part feels like a little wishful thinking,
that feels really scary.
Well, what do you think, Sarah? What comes to you in this?
You know what popped right into my brain is we have a South Sudanese congregation at St. B's who are made up primarily of people around our age. And, you know, those are people who as children, their parents were murdered, and a lot of children hid in the jungles and managed to make their way through several countries and somehow land in the United States. And it's this incredible community that their kids learn language every week. Like, that's a part of Sunday school, is that they learn language. And, you know, I did not know this, but in that culture, really tall women are attractive. Like taller than me, like 6 foot plus women. And they'll come in and they've got this like trail of children behind them. And then they are like super pregnant playing drums. Like, it is an incredible thing to watch them like embrace church, embrace their community. And Josh told me this story this past Sunday. He was doing communion with them, and somebody's wife dropped a wafer, and the husband, like on the floor, and the husband came by and picked it up and put it in his mouth. And I think it was as much because it was communion as it was, he said, well, we believe that things that are dropped on the floor are connected to our ancestors. And it was such a profound moment for, like, Josh came home and I was like, that's so, there's so much happening within that community, you know, and it's not large, and, you know, our community is bigger and blah, blah, blah. It's so much more depth and so much more happening. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have like a bow on that. It's what popped into my head because that whole experience is so foreign to me, you know, even in church can be really foreign depending on where you're at church. So I think the churches, especially St. B's and Holy Spirit, the ones we served, have done a remarkably good job of like it being a firm community for people, but you know, every time I take my kids to church, they're looking out the car windows going, hey, those people aren't at church. Why are they going for a run? Where are they going? You know, it's like, we're such a small number. It feels big, but Dave, RJ, you guys are at big churches, and it's like, it feels like such a big number when you're in there. But when you hear 21% of Americans go to church every Sunday, like, that's staggering to me. Like, I never think of myself as naive on this topic, but it is really, really disturbing.
On that front, I feel like we're kind of ripe for revival, to be honest with you. We're kind of in that.
I don't know. Do you think so?
I really actually do. I really do. They seem to come. The last big revival we had, according to people who study this thing, was like the Jesus People movement in the 1960s and 70s, kind of that Jesus Revolution movie, which I know, Sarah, you never saw.
No, absolutely not. No,
absolutely not. But we're about due. They seem to come along around every 60 or 70 years. And it does just feel like we're getting tired of other things which seem to scratch that itch, sort of like partisan politics and social media and whatever. It just doesn't seem to be working. So I don't know. I'm a little bit hopeful that we're sort of bottoming out, and that maybe, could it get worse? I guess it could get worse, but I think maybe we're going to bounce off the bottom and come back. With regard to loneliness, I think about two things. One, yes, I agree that just trying to put yourself in situations with other people, trying to be around other people, trying to sort of get out there versus just kind of stay home and watch TV or doom scroll on your phone or whatever is a good thing, because when you're just around people, good things can happen, right? Miracles can happen. It's like, Woody Allen, 90% of life is just showing up. And to some degree, making a friend, like an actual friend, is a little bit like falling in love. It is kind of a miracle, right? When you find someone that you really connect with. On the flip side, I do think that just being around people won't necessarily assuage your loneliness. It can actually maybe even make you feel more lonely, because the key to friendship is finding someone who you feel like actually knows you and you can be yourself around and you can share your pain with and isn't going to go, ugh, and back away. And that is a risk. And it's been a difficult time and people have been going through a difficult time, but the last thing you want to do is meet a new person and then also just kind of totally spill your guts to them. So it's like this dance, right? Like you meet someone, you're like, I kind of like them. Maybe they like me. How much vulnerability can I risk? How much do I want to risk exposing myself? And they're feeling the same thing because you want to do enough, but not too much. And it's this delicate dance. So I think the figuring that out, the willingness to be vulnerable and to tell the truth and to navigate the fear of like oversharing in those moments. I also saw something this week, which I thought was kind of interesting and unexpected, but also sort of hopeful. It was about people who are moving and about how last year, something like only like 9% of the American population moved, which was like the second lowest it's been in the last 70 years. Apparently in 1960, and really all through the 60s, 70s, whatever, 80s, about 20% of the American population moved in a given year. And now it's like 9%. And part of that has to do with interest rates and people, and cost of living and whatever it might be. But I actually find something kind of hopeful about that because I think the less you move, the more chance you have that you might actually make a friend. And the more you move, I mean, as you know, Sarah, being in pastoral ministry, you move a lot.
Yeah.
And every time you move, you have to sort of reconstitute your social network. And it takes a little while, right? At least your local social network. So I think the fact that maybe people are moving less, maybe that opens up more possibility for like lasting connection. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing I want to say here also, just because I know we have women who listen who don't really work outside the home, is like I was ill prepared for how lonely it is.
Oh my gosh.
To do that.
So
like
lonely.
I've never not worked, outside the home, and it's very lonely. I mean, this whole past year was like incredibly lonely. And part of getting off of social media was me, I think, like letting myself name that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think I had not realized how lonely I was. And but the other thing is like, yes, moving, you get to stay in your network, but I have to say, like, Nashville has been in some ways a better fit for me. I don't think I realized how hard it was to make friends in Houston in a lot of ways. Like, I mean, I love my Houston friends and we love, book clubs and stuff are fun, but like somebody might throw up at a book club. Do you know what I mean? Like somebody might drink a little too much and throw up at a book club. And like, that wasn't an unnormal thing. And here it's like, they want to read the book. Right. So I will say, like, I am in some ways less lonely because of Nashville, but more lonely because of, I don't think, like, of course, it's like takes you being in this role to realize it, but I don't think we talk enough about just how lonely it is to be a parent at home, So anyway.
I sense the palpable loneliness. I mean, I think that, yes, a lot of women who are at home with the kids are very lonely. And then I talked to a therapist friend of mine who says his practice is filled with nothing but middle-aged men who are crushingly lonely.
Yes.
And that's been my experience of my cohort as well. Men don't make friends, and that's why.
It's everyone.
But I also see, I mean, I'm a little, maybe I've got rose-tinted glasses because I'm just in a peculiar situation like RJ, where our church post-COVID is just exploding. And we never had larger attendance, not since, much larger than in the 1950s. And yes, the programming is great. Jane Grizzle is the most incredible children's minister. We have like great music, and I think the preaching is decent.
It's okay.
But the I think people just love being around other people, and there is a hunger for it. I mean, that's comfort. And anytime you try to create a religious community, but you take out the God piece, it just doesn't work. All the research shows that. Sadly, it doesn't have the same potency. You can't pretend that it's like there's something that's binding you together. And
you guys are proclaiming a message that allows people to enter into honesty. About what's actually going on in their life, because God loves them as they are. And that's a huge thing too, right? To come into a space where, and I've had people, one of my favorite things that people say about Holy Trinity is it's a place where you sort of feel like you can just be yourself and let your hair down and sort of take a deep breath, as opposed to feeling like you need to measure up to something.
Which is like a huge deal. And I'm not making a joke, which is a huge deal given where you live, RJ. I mean, that's a big deal, like for people to say that
Florida,
is a big
man.
deal.
Yeah.
Because it's a scene, baby. It is a scene,
Well, it's a scene in Central Virginia. It's just nothing but money, money, money. But when I forwarded this to a friend, he said his response was, and he's not a religious person, he said, I think that just means the prospects for the church are actually better than you guys think they are. And like,
that's what I'm saying.
Help explain something. And I want to... begin the fall with some hope on that direction. And it's backed up by what I'm seeing. We're also, by the way, I just have to say, Mockingbird just released the home issue of our magazine. It's actually being mailed out as we speak. And to be honest with you, home is kind of a euphemism for loneliness. It's like that's what most people are talking about in their essays is the yearning for home. Because they're lonely, or because something else is not cutting it. And there's some beautiful, beautiful essays in there about that. But I think if any, I'm looking for hope as a person in ministry, and I think that this is part of it.
If Richard Dawkins can admit that he's actually a cultural Christian and that all his ethics and morals are Christian, then I think we have a lot of people recognizing that. I think the Tom Holland thing is sort of taking root in our culture where people are like, oh, wait, that's true. I might not like the church. I might have a tough time with Christians, but Jesus is pretty great. And probably everything I value is Christian.
Yeah. Well, you want to see what loneliness truly does to people. Watch that show alone. It's incredible. Yeah. It's not a small thing. This is life and death. This is not actually. It's not actually just an extra thing to have meaningful connection with other people. It will determine things. But let's not get too hopeful because this is the Mockingcast. So
don't worry.
Let's go into the next thing, which is
as long as Sarah's here.
Don't worry.
Unbelievable. A slight trigger warning here for anyone dealing with estrangement. But there was a long, long article in the New Yorker this week called "Why So Many People Are Going, quote unquote, no contact with their parents." This is written by Anna Russell. It's a really long piece. I'm going to try to boil some of it down for you, but it is, I think, anyone who works in church ministry will tell you that this is a huge topic that they're dealing with. And
everybody.
And therapy practices as well. It is not a small thing. So the fact that they would write about it is not just validating, but I think it's relevant and important. She writes this: family estrangement, the process by which family members become strangers to one another, is still somewhat taboo, but in some circles that's changing. In recent years, advocates for the estranged have begun a concerted effort to normalize it. There is relatively little data on the subject, but some psychologists cite anecdotal evidence that an increasing number of young people are cutting out their parents. Discussion about the issue has just exploded, and you'll find lots of this on TikTok and other places like that. Now, get this. According to a survey conducted at Cornell in 2019, 27% of Americans are currently estranged from a relative. So if you haven't experienced it yet yourself, you probably know someone who has. Now, she did a deep dive into this. She says, in interviews with nearly a dozen people who have little to no contact with certain family members, I heard a wide range of explanations. One woman had spent much of her 20s coming to terms with sexual abuse from her father before cutting ties with her entire extended family. Other fissures were harder to trace. Some people felt ignored or misunderstood by their parents, or believed that a sibling had always been the family's favorite. Several described a family member as a quote-unquote classic narcissist or as toxic.
Yeah, there aren't that many narcissists out there.
Nope. For some,
are you being sarcastic or are you serious? Oh, no, 27% worth.
I'm serious. I mean, it's like that word gets used so much now. It is like an actual psychological diagnosis, and not that many people can have it. So that's
Yes.
Yeah. I was talking to a marriage therapist recently who said that 95% of the couples she sees, the wife thinks that the husband is a narcissist, and the husband thinks that the wife is psychotic.
And it turns out they're both just really lonely and probably don't have a diagnosis at all, other than maybe depression.
But I thought to myself, this was a female psychoanalyst saying this to me. Funny. I said, "What?" She said, "Yeah, it's true. It's uncanny. It's like I know within it that's the pattern. That's that's the accusation coming in." No, I'm sure there are. By the way, I've met my fair share of actual living, breathing narcissists, especially many of whom are share my same gender.
Especially in high-performing contexts,
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
Yeah.
She says this, for some, going no contact felt like a weight lifted. You get this clarity, one woman who distanced herself from her parents because of her father's rage told me. She described the experience of pressing pause on a tape she had heard over and over again since childhood. You get to silence all of that, and you get to just know who you are. But like many people I spoke with, her newfound freedom came with guilt. She says, there are still days when I doubt myself. What if I invented it all? Or what if I just understood wrong? Or what if they mean well? They then go on to talk about the role that forums and the internet plays in this. A lot of Reddit sort of venting. Anyone who spent time on Reddit knows posting there can be validating. You spill your guts and can be affirmed. You can rage. When there's nowhere else to turn, this is helpful, maybe even life-saving. But scrolling through no-contact communities online, one can find it hard to avoid the fact that posters are not exactly unbiased. Some are vigilant about not allowing parents into the forums, and sometimes they advocate a slash-and-burn approach to complex relationships. She interviewed a therapist whose practice focuses on sort of counseling people who are estranged. This woman said, most people walking into my office have reached a place where they're helpless and hopeless to change the relationship. Campbell, this is the therapist, told Russell that toxic people are different from flawed people. I mean, I'm a parent. I'm flawed, she said. But toxic people are, quote, very bad people with good moments. They're not good people with bad moments. Russell, the writer, says, I wondered where the line was. Campbell told me that toxic parents often use the phrase, because I'm your parent, to justify their behavior. But, Russell says, other parents, tired, frustrated, burned out, say that too.
I was like, oh, shit.
I know. She goes on to say, support groups are a little more nuanced than Reddit forums. One middle-aged man from London who became estranged from his family as a result of a communication breakdown told me that he found one of the support groups he attended helpful, but wished they offered more advice for people feeling unsure about their choices. He said, you've got people who are estranged, but they're really happy. But then you've got this sort of the middle category of people who are estranged that either want to not be estranged or don't know if they want to be. And often there isn't necessarily a really good reason for our estrangement, but many misunderstandings along the way. Then after a while, it's just too much time under the bridge. She goes on. She says, when I spoke to adult children who had found some peace after distancing themselves from their parents, I felt relieved. But it was complicated when I spoke to, she says, a mother who had not heard from her daughter in more than 10 years, who didn't know where she was or how she was doing. And I felt her pain keenly. They had always been close, but they clashed after her daughter finished university and wanted to travel on her own. One day, the mother received a text from her daughter asking her not to contact her again. And that was it, the mom said.
Whoa.
When it first happened to me, I really didn't know what I'd done. But I can see now, with the help of a lot of therapy, things weren't that good and weren't right. She hoped to speak with her daughter again, even if it's only one conversation. I asked her what kind of relationship she would be willing to accept. I'd accept anything, she said. Anything would be better than this. She then speaks with, this gets really interesting here, with Joshua Coleman, a clinical psychologist and author of a book about estrangement, who spent several years estranged from his own daughter, who described the experience as nightmarish. I found myself daily rehearsing every parental mistake I'd ever made. It was frightening, it was heartbreaking, it was guilt-inducing, it was shame-inducing. He and his daughter have since reconciled. He now helps parents figure out life after being cut off. Mostly, they are devastated. Every day, I'm dealing with parents, or mothers in particular, who are just sobbing when they call me. The amount of grief that the parent feels is really hard to describe. Some take responsibility for what happened, but some are frankly confused. Coleman believes that estrangement is becoming more common in part because of, quote, changing notions of what constitutes harmful, abusive, traumatizing, or neglectful behavior. He cited a paper that showed that the definition of trauma has expanded in the past 3 decades to include experiences that were once considered ordinary. The bar for qualifying as trauma today is much lower. We've talked about this in past episodes of the Mockingcast, the sort of the slightly over-therapization of culture. He sees partners cut out because they say negative things about a child's sexuality, a romantic partner, or because they refuse to accept a child's boundaries. But a growing number of his clients cite political differences as a reason for estrangement. There's been a shift away from honor thy father and mother, Coleman says, and towards notions of happiness and mental health. This was fascinating to me. He said, in some ways, the ideals we now have for romantic love are really parallel to the ideals we have for parent-adult-child relationships. Now, I want to stop there because there's so much to unpack in this. But I want to say before I do that I know some people who've cut off their parents, and I know some who've done it for very, life-saving reasons. There's no question that abuse plays a big role in this. However, being in, and this is not to judge any particular situation, but I will say that I am also in a position where I work at a church where I know not just one or two, but I know I can name 6 parents, and they're all mothers, who I love and who have at least one child who will not speak to them, and they don't know why, and it is the number one issue in their life. And these are not... they're complicated people, and they've got histories, and they've made mistakes, but they are not. They are not villainous folks who I just know this. I've known them for years, and they live with this daily. And churches, in a lot of ways, clergy, are left to pick up the pieces from this, and it is a deep, deep heartache. So it's real, and my experience of it has been to see the parents who live in total agony and mystery. And my heart just breaks. I don't know what else to say, but some of the holiest people I know are secretly dealing with something like this. And I don't have much. It just complicates whatever victimhood narrative and especially once you become a parent, it's one of these things where once you become a parent, all of your thinking about this sort of thing changes, for better and worse. But I don't know. You guys, you've both been nodding your heads this entire time. So speak. Sarah, what are you thinking?
Well, we have this in our own life with Josh's parents. And there was sort of, it felt like, and I hope this isn't too much for me to say, but it sort of felt like relief on their part when we said, hey, we got to take some time. So that is different than the situations you're describing. I was really proud of him when we started at this church, and he did all of these sort of like, go to people's homes, tell a story, meet people individually. And he started with that. Because I think there is something distinctly unmooring for people when they hear that the priest struggles with this. And also because so many people struggle with it, it's also, there's some comfort in that, right? So it's, it's a thing we talk about a lot, about sort of how things landed and, how we'd hoped they'd gone differently, but that didn't really seem to be the feeling on the other side, which is also its own deep pain and grief for us, especially since we don't have parents on either side now. I have a friend who is, she has this beautiful balance of really not putting herself in the line of fire with her parents, to the extent that I'm sure they feel neglected, but never cutting off. And a couple weeks ago, I was reaching out to her. She said, we've got, my dad's in the hospital, so I'm going to take the kids and we're going to go visit him. And I thought, there is a beautiful way, I think, in some of these circumstances where you can do the work. And I do want to say that, like, do the work, go to therapy. I said to somebody the other day, you need to go to therapy. I said this. You need to go to therapy. And for the first 2 to 5 years, you're only going to talk about your family. That's what you need to do. And you need to get on psychiatric medication because it makes the therapy go faster. It's just like, this is before you do anything, you need to do that. And I don't know if I were in this situation today and I was thinking about pulling back and I was looking at therapists, I would actually interview therapists and ask them, like, how does this go for you usually? Because I do think, frankly, I do think there are a lot of therapists out there that this is just their first move. And there's a chasm of things you can do before you cut off from your parents. So yeah.
Sometimes, you, by the way, you also meet a parent who's got dealing with this and you're like, okay, I get it. Like, If I were your child, I might have to.
You're like, I'm going to leave the room. I can't even. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's incredible that Josh does it. It's very awkward as a Christian minister all of us who not only are stuck with Christ's very awkward injunctions to love one's enemies, but all the talk about forgiveness, it's like, well, I haven't been able to make this happen in my own life. But that's also extremely powerful to see. If I were someone, and Josh had said that to me, I was like, well, this looks like a man who actually knows what it's like to need God because he can't be God.
Yeah.
And I would find that very powerful. I know other people would, probably have more questions, but RJ,
they do.
RJ, RJ, you could share to the extent you like, but I know that you're no stranger to any of this.
A couple times. I mean, there was a season in my life and the life of at least one of my other brothers where we kind of cut off contact with our father because of some things he had done that led to the dissolution of his marriage to our mother. And at some point we reconciled, I think, as much as we could and spent time together and loved him and enjoyed him as best we could, while also recognizing his faults, which is also like a huge part of growing up yourself and realizing your parents are not perfect and that mistakes are made. And then, I'm one of 4 boys, and one of my brothers has decided to just completely cut off contact with us, with our mother, and kind of just gone his own way, and gotten remarried and has a new family and has children that we've never met before. And
RJ, that's so hard. I don't think I realized that.
It is, but we've done everything we know how to do. We still call and text on his birthday. We reach out to him every so often. I think one of us talks to him every so often, but it doesn't necessarily feel like there's anything we've done. It doesn't feel like if it was just me, then I'm like, what have I done? But it's everybody. He's just decided to go his own way. I know I have a therapist friend who helps a lot of parents and adult children kind of reconcile or figure out their issues. And I think he did say to me once, he said, it's almost always the parent. It's almost always having to help the parent see things from their kid's perspective and realize things. And take that for what it's worth. It was an off the cuff comment. But it's definitely a fear. It's something I think about. Like, God forbid one of my 3 sons comes to the place where they're just like, Mom, Dad, you guys are toxic and I don't want anything to do with you. Like, that would, my God, my wife has been in tears recently just because our 2 boys are like not living at home anymore. One's working and one's in college, and she just misses them, we're kind of back to school season and she really misses them. So the idea that they would never want to talk to us ever again. Like, my wife might just go to bed and never get up. But like Davey said, I know so many people in my church who have very similar situations. Children who don't talk to them. They don't know what they've done or how they're doing. They don't know how to reconcile.
God does answer prayers of this kind, I see. Not in the way prayers. That we do, but I watched a family deal with a dementia diagnosis and telling me that it was the best thing that a mother telling me it was the best thing that ever happened because it brought one of their children back into their lives. And I thought to myself, I hope it's not dementia that does that, because that's, again, once you have children, this is what you think.
Of course, it's dementia that does that.
Sideswipe, but it's suffering.
It's suffering.
It is suffering.
It's suffering.
Yes. Yeah, and I've seen that too.
Yeah,
and but he also, John. I was talking to John Zoll about this. My brother. We did an episode about parenting and the Mockingjay, for the brother Saul, and we talked a little bit about this. And he said, I found that one other prayer that God seems to answer is that if your biological children have cut off contact with you, sometimes God brings new surrogate children into your life. And that can be a very healing thing. And God also brings new people into their lives. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, I really would like to meet your parents and stuff like that. And things do happen. Within the article, he says that it's a little like Sleeping Beauty, where the relationship gets frozen in amber when that happens, but people's lives go on. And sometimes things do happen and you see how it goes on. There's some hope in the article. I will just write this. He says, when Coleman works with parents who want to reconcile with an estranged child, he will typically ask them to write an amends letter to see if a dialogue might be opened. The letter might acknowledge mistakes and note, quote, I know that you wouldn't have cut off contact unless it was the healthiest thing for you to do. That's grace, if ever there was.
Yes.
If the child agrees to attend family therapy and the parent is willing to respect the child's boundaries in terms of when and how often they speak, the chances of reconciliation, he says, are extremely high. So there's no way to ignore the fact that this is increasing as, I think, a quick option for people. And when we decry the loneliness of the world and say, at the same time, people are quickly being told to cut off the meaningful contact with one's parents. That might, I don't know. I think, by the way, this happens predominantly, and it should be said, in more progressive circles. Like, that's
this is a lot of white people.
And some,
are
like,
doing
from
this.
the outside
same
looking in,
people who are going to the Outer Banks.
This is a lot of people having too much therapy too. It's like,
by themselves.
There's one brother who writes to someone who cuts off contact. He's like, "You're just a self-obsessed psycho." And you're sort of like, well, if the shoe fits. But it does beg the question of forgiveness. Of like, we can talk a huge line about forgiveness, and this is
and repentance. Like, actually, that letter sounds like genuine, from the heart repentance in a way that you just don't necessarily see in our culture.
Yeah, and it's especially as a parent who's going through it right now and making all manner of mistakes. So you think to yourself, "Oh my gosh, is this going to be the one that causes them to write me out of the story later?" And God forbid.
Yeah. I don't. Well, so two things. I don't know. I don't know that forgiveness is the right word. Especially as a Christian who's dealt with this. I think I had a very complicated relationship with my dad, and I think we can forgive people and also know that maybe being with them is not the best thing for us. And those can be the same thing.
Yeah.
I worry about people who aren't Christian who live with this, or who are Christian and really just live in hate, because it's not helpful, right? But I mean, as another advertisement, like, we need more, but for church, like, we do have replacement grandparents. We got some in Houston, Kim and David, and like, they're still very much in our lives. Kim came when we moved, like, we, like, parents. And we've managed to find some of those people at St. B's. And I don't know how you do that for your children and for yourself if you don't go to some sort of religious institution.
I mean, and exactly. You're not going to find that at a bar, but God
they don't sell that at Target.
God not only sends surrogate children into lives, but surrogate parents as well, and that can be very healing. And I think you're right to say this, because I've just written this whole book about grace, and the injunction to love our enemies is a very, very clear thing from Jesus. But sometimes I got to say, I'm not Jesus. I don't love my enemies, but sometimes loving one's enemy might not mean talking to them ever again.
Yeah. You subjecting yourself.
That's not loving to them, to sort of put them in a position to continue to like abuse you.
Right.
And so there are caveats around this, I think. But as a Christian, I certainly hope we pray. Reconciliation should be the vector of the heart, whether or not we can ever get there, or we can just pray for the willingness to be willing to want to one day think that it's possible that this could happen. And I think where possible, we leave the door open wherever we can. But in some cases, that's simply not possible. And
it's not possible here on this earthly plane.
Yes.
That's right. Someday.
That's a good way to...
Someday.
Well, I want to get to something about forgiveness, actually, that it was the most beautiful thing I read all summer. This was something in The Point, written by Lyndon Smith, about Marilyn Robinson's new book about reading Genesis. Now, I haven't read Marilyn Robinson's book because basically I appreciate her more in theory than in practice. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to cut that out.
Please do not cut that out. We just read Gilead in my book club that doesn't throw up. And I was the only one that didn't like it. So please don't.
I'm just so glad she's out there. Let's just put it that way.
Me too.
I think she's incredibly gifted writer. Yeah, doing the work. But this is by Lyndon Smith. He writes this: "When I was a teenager, my younger sister got leukemia and died a year later." Hey, we're back in the Mockencast.
We're back, baby. We're back.
10 years on, I have yet to see anyone suffer more protractedly and senselessly. I was an atheist at the time, so her illness and death did not raise theodicy questions for me. But it did instill in me a sense that there is something evil in nature, and insofar as we are part of nature, something evil in us.
Yeah.
After my sister died, I put my faith in the salvific power of interpretation. What I needed, I felt, was to find a meaning for it all. What I wanted was not finally knowledge or self-understanding, but rather a story to inhabit. The man who won wisdom from loss. My atheism was no obstacle to finding beauty or goodness in the world. I found it in art and the human spirit in moments of presence. The trouble was rather that atheism has just as much a difficulty as religion with explaining evil. Intellectually, I understood that my sister died because of one of her cells failed to replicate properly, but understanding that is no more satisfying than believing that God willed it. But whether evil is a witness against God or merely an intractable puzzle in its own right, what is one to do about it? Well, for Marilyn Robinson, we must forgive evil. Robinson stresses that God had to forgive creation for creation to continue. In Robinson's reading of the flood story, God repented of the destruction he had caused, and even though, being God, he could have remade the world so that evil and violence were excluded from it, he forgave or forbore the corrupt thoughts of human hearts. He chose to let us be, to let time yield what it will within the vast latitude granted by providence. And the redemption of the world in Robinson's reading is not just God's job, it takes place through human forgiveness. This might seem like easy wisdom after the words "turn the other cheek" have been floating around for a couple of millennia. But the forgiveness that Robinson is after is the real deal. Joseph in Genesis, his brothers sold him into slavery. There was no sense in which Joseph could have understood, could have fully empathized with his brother's decisions to cast him out. Evil like that is unintelligible, which means Joseph's forgiving them had nothing to do with understanding them or their motives. Forgiveness is to yield to love, even and especially when it is insane to do so. When you forgive, you love what you do not and cannot understand. There's no explanation for how one might come to love like this. There are no psychological tricks, no spiritual recipe. Either one does or one does not. If one loves absurdly, it is only by grace. And if one wants to love absurdly but cannot, it is a stark reminder of our smallness. Love is a duty that the will cannot fulfill. What a line. Holy smokes. And yet it is there, in experiencing absolute limits within myself, in my failure to love and forgive, that I found God. Of course, I never found a story that redeemed my sister's death. I found 100 convincing explanations, and yet none of them have ever changed me to my satisfaction. My will is something apart from any story I can tell about it. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. That's Paul. When you experience yourself as being entirely beyond your own control and forgiveness feels out of reach, prayer is all you have. And he sort of ends the thing with talking about how he couldn't forgive what had happened, but what he could do with the help of, Karamazov's Dostoevsky, was to ask for forgiveness. And that was his road into God and healing. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful picture of finding God's presence beyond the limits of your ability to forgive or not, or reconcile or not. I thought it was just a gorgeously written piece too. Anything that comes up for you guys?
Well, it's a big relief.
Hey, ka-ching.
Hey.
Hashtag the big relief. Yes.
I mean, seriously though, it's that's that freeing feeling of like it's not on us, and I think it's just crazy to me that people still believe we have free will. Like, it's really literally crazy to me. Like, ignore all the religion. Ignore all the religion. There's so much science. So it's just this, he's not doing anything that, who among us hasn't thought, well, I'm just going to try to like get closer to God, and this is how I do it. And it turns out the way that you do it is not the fun way. Do you know what I mean? It's not up to you. It's not up to your actions. It's actually like God calling you towards reconciliation.
I was just thinking how exhausting it is to love people.
Wow. Say more.
Like, I like people. I really like people. I love people, but people are crazy, including myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's, I don't know. It's just exhausting to love people and leave space for mercy, forgiveness, to let people, to let people work out their crazy, and for God to heal them and be present with them as they're working it out. But I do feel like that's what that's what the church is, and hopefully that's like what a loving family is too. It's a place where you have the safety and the love to kind of work out your crazy and begin to become maybe become the sort of new creation that Paul is talking about, because the love you're experiencing, the safety, the community it calms down the crazy. You know, I think.
But it's not another accusation to forgive better or faster or larger. It is a proclamation. I mean, that's the law. It's the proclamation that God forgives you, that you have been given the space to.
Well, here's a place you can come into where you're just going to be accepted as you are, craziness and all, and no one's going to try to sort of change you or reform you. They're just going to love you because that's what God does, and then trust the Holy Spirit that in, God's time, things will work out the way they're supposed to work out, something like that.
I think it becomes this. You heard it in the parenting article about toxicity. Every time I hear that word, and that therapist who says that there's this huge difference between really bad people with good moments and really good people with bad moments, and you always think about, well, where do the toxic people go? Like, I don't know anyone who refers to themselves as, hi, I'm Dave. I'm just really toxic. Like, don't get anywhere close to me. And that's why I think the church, I think that's where you go when there's nowhere else to go. And that's why it's filled with ridiculous and difficult people, because it's the what do you call it?
That's all there is.
That's all there is.
All there is. That's all there is.
It's the fellowship.
Everyone's toxic, it turns out. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's the fellowship of the toxic and the devastated. This is why Jane Grizzle
International League of the Guilty
wrote a wonderful piece about, if you guys, I know you haven't watched it yet, but the show Slow Horses, which is also on Apple Plus with Gary Oldman, is amazing. And it's really just about a bunch of total disasters who end up doing the work of God, or at least the work of good in the world, despite having been the ones who were chosen last at recess or kicked out of every job they've ever had. And it's sort of like, can good things happen here? Actually, watch this. They can happen in a way that will continually confound all expectations and be so clear that it's only through the miraculous intervention that someone like this could enact a positive outcome in the world. I'm going to read one story about what this looks like when it's addressed to you and I, and then we're finished. This is from Sam Bush, wrote a wonderful thing based on a sermon in the middle of the summer called "The Good News Isn't for Everyone, but It Is for You." And he says this: to feel a part of something greater than oneself is nothing to scoff at. Many people come to church at Sundays for that very reason. Collective effervescence is what it's called. But the events that actually shape a person's life, and I would say keep a person at church, are often extremely intimate one-on-one encounters. Religion may be the opiate of the masses, but Christianity is not a religion because it is not for the masses. It is for you. Jesus makes clear that the gospel is either for you or it's for nobody. He forfeits the 99 in order to save the one lost sheep. The multitudes pass by as he hones in on the loners. The power of the gospel lies in its specificity. God's love is not best expressed on a billboard, but in a support group. He does not speak in blanket statements to the crowd, but a specific word to the individual. His chief concern is the very thing that keeps a person up at night. Then he tells this story about Patti Smith, the wonderful musician and singer and poet. Patti Smith, who's performed in front of millions of people over the years, once had an extremely intimate experience of grace that would shape the rest of her life. Back in 1956, when she was 10 years old, living in rural New Jersey, she would accompany her mother to the A&P to buy groceries. While there, she saw a promotional display for the World Book Encyclopedia. The volumes were beautiful, the spines stamped in gold, and volume 1 was 99 cents with a $10 purchase. At the time, money was tight. Her father wasn't working, and her mother was supporting them as a waitress. When she asked if they could buy it, her mother said, "Not now, Patricia. Today is not a good day." Well, a week later, Patti's mother sent her to the store. Patti had been thinking about the encyclopedia nonstop. She went straight to the World Book display. There was only one volume left. So she put it under her windbreaker and says, in hindsight, you could have easily seen it. On her way out, she gets caught by the store detective. I guess there was a store detective. She says, the biggest man I had ever seen, who tells her that he'll let her go as long as she promises she'll confess what she's done to her mom. The minute Patti gets home, she's so anxious, she vomits on the floor. And then tells her mom the whole story. And this is what happens next, according to Patti Smith. It's in her book, Just Kids. My mother was a good mother, but she could be explosive. And I tensed, waiting for the barrage of verbal punishment, the sentencing that always seemed to outweigh the crime. But she said nothing. She told me that she would call the store and tell the detective I had confessed and that I should sleep. When I awoke, sometime later, the house was silent. My mother had taken my siblings to the field to play. I sat up and noticed a brown paper bag with my name on it. I opened it, and inside was the World Book Encyclopedia, Volume 1. Sam writes, this very private experience had a profound effect on Patti Smith. It likely changed the way she saw herself and other people, the way she understood justice and mercy. The great novelist Cormac McCarthy once wrote, mercy is in the province of the person alone. There is mass hatred and mass grief, mass vengeance, and even mass suicide. But there is no mass forgiveness. There is only you. The same applies with our salvation. God's love may have been for the world, but the good news isn't for everyone. It's for you. That's sort of a mic drop moment. I thought it was a mic drop when he preached that sermon, but I also thought this thing he's trying to say in a world that's lonely, you don't just need a huge group. You need one person. You need one friend. You need one parent, perhaps even, but you need love is mediated through one single act of grace here. It's targeted and specific and exactly the thing that she wants. It brings a tear to my eye. I think that's, as I move into the fall, at least, that's the kind of spirit with which I want to move in response to that kind of thing, not some large idea or some hopeful notion about groups of people, but that God targets me like that, not according to my ability to do the right thing, to forgive the right people, to include the right, to make more friends, but in the midst of my shame and, transgression. So anyway, I'll stop preaching. I would love to hear what the two of you think before we sign off.
Well, you guys know how I feel about recycling.
Refresh our memories, Sarah.
It's not my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Paper plates.
I love a paper plate.
Mm-hmm.
I love a single-use plastic. I think there are these big movements of things. I love that vision. Progressive and conservative, where it's like, well, we all have to fix this problem and get behind this issue, and we're going to be the ones. And sometimes that happens. And it's certainly not to say that these things that need a massive amount of movement and people aren't valuable, because they are. But it's such an interesting idea. And I wonder so much what the country would look like if Christians took seriously the imperative that the only thing that we need to do is forgive. Like if that was just the mission for a year. Do you know what I mean? Like Jubilee year. We're just going to forgive all year. That's the one thing we can do. It's such a beautiful idea to me.
Yeah, Sarah, I agree with you. That would be, so it'd be amazing if we just also, our job is to forgive. And like forgiveness is hard. Like there's a cost to it, I do feel like, as Christians I don't know. I feel as parents maybe too, or it's almost like you have to, in forgiving other people's whatever, it's like you're absorbing it a little bit, right? You're not reflecting it. You're not amplifying it. You're not angry. You're absorbing it. And it's tough sometimes to figure out like where to go with that and what to do with it, and to find someone else that can be the receptacle for yours. You're taking it and then you got to take it somewhere, like parents need to be able to take what their kids are dishing out and share that with the spouse or a friend or whatever, and not reflect it back on the kids. Like that's when the problem occurs. So Jamie and I are talking about this too. We get a little bit like this every fall. I think the transition from summer to fall is difficult. And it usually takes us a few weeks to kind of like get our heads right and get our feet under us a little bit. I think I'm feeling that right now, like the transitional time from like, okay, the summer was good. We had some time off. Some of it was really hard and exhausting, to be honest with you. Like officiating 2 funerals that was exhausting, and the travel and whatever, and her taking care of her family. But just coming back into the fall and feeling, I don't know, inadequate, and a little overwhelmed and wanting I guess for myself wanting, like I hear what Sam's saying, but I want to feel that a little bit. I want to feel that personal touch, God show up in that way.
To RJ, not to South Florida.
Yeah. And not to my church, but to me. That'd be nice. So I'm waiting for that. I'm praying for that.
Well, that's the prayer.
Yeah. Sarah, what were you going to say?
I just hope, one of the things I've learned in a lot of therapy, a lot of work on my marriage, and also in mom and dad dying and it not being their fault, it literally being someone else's fault. Sometimes we just have to let forgiveness pass through us, and we actually don't have to hold it. So, I mean, I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I used to feel more like, and I was certainly raised in a household where it was like, and we used to work someplace where the line was, you have to absorb it. And I just don't think that's true anymore. I don't think we find peace there, and I don't think we find wholeness, and I certainly don't actually think we can find forgiveness, in sort of inflicting this on ourselves. But to let forgiveness pass through us by the grace of God, I think is the gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's, guys, I'm excited to be back with you this fall to explore all the wrinkles of where the rubber meets the road, and also the non-serious ones as well. I hope people enjoy the new little logo we've got for the Mocking Cast. Those who've seen it know that it explains the whole purpose of the thing. There are three faces, but then there's this little bird that is tugging on the red thread of grace in such a way that it forms a little cross. And hopefully, at our best moments, that is happening, and maybe even that happened today in this. But thank you for listening and tuning back in and accompanying us, and we'll see you in a few weeks. God bless you all.
Bye.
See ya. Have a good week.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mocking Cast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.